You can watch the same 60 seconds on a clock, and it can feel completely different depending on what's happening in your mind. A minute in a boring meeting feels like torture, feels like forever. A minute with someone you love disappears very quickly. And in a scary moment, like in a near accident, time almost slows down. And here's the creepy part. We don't have a time sense organ. We have no time receptor in our bodies. We have no time nerve. Yet time runs our entire lives. So today I want to mess with the default story that time is some solid thing out there.
Time, in some sense, is just a label on different events in the universe. The universe happens over and over again at different things we call moments, and time helps us tell the difference between one moment and another.
What if time is partly a human invention, partly brain function, and partly something even physics admits is way stronger than we think? One of my favorite stories about time is in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a short, famous spiritual and philosophical text from India embedded in a greater text called the Mahabharata. And the setting is a battlefield where a warrior named Arjuna is having a moral and emotional breakdown right before a major war. Arjuna is looking at the battlefield and he basically is thinking, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what's right anymore, I don't want to do this. And he's riding in a chariot, and his chariot driver is Krishna, who in the text is presented as a divine teacher and in many traditions is known as God. And subsequently, Krishna reveals a terrifying cosmic form, often called a universal form. And in that form, Krishna tells Arjuna, I am time, the destroyer of worlds. Some translations use time, some use death, but the meaning is the force that ends everything. And in that universal form, vision, Arjuna sees armies, one after the other, rushing into Krishna's vast mouth. It was like reality itself was being swallowed. That's why people describe it as time devouring the world, the eater of worlds vibe. So the takeaway is that time isn't really a clock. Time is the cosmic mechanism that consumes everything eventually. Plans, egos, empires, and your excuses. And so I think the point is not to be scared necessarily. The point is when time is framed as this unstoppable force, it snaps you out of procrastination fantasies. And it turns time into a teacher. So do what you can to stop negotiating, stop debating, and to start living deliberately. And the Gita treats time like a god because it's the one force that nobody escapes. Another story I like is a book by Martin Heidegger, who is a 20th century German philosopher. And that book is called Being and Time, published in 1927. And in that book, he basically asks a big question. What does it mean to exist as a human? The main idea is that time isn't mainly a clock thing. Time is how human life is structured internally. So basically for humans, time equals meaning, urgency, and care. Just like Buddhists do, Heidegger argues about the awareness of death, or what he calls being toward death, which is supposed to pull you out of autopilot living and forces you to confront all your freedom and all of your choices that you could potentially make. And also knowing that you don't have infinite tries. We are finite, so you have to live like you're finite. So basically, time isn't a concept, it becomes a lived reality when you realize your days are numbered. So Martin Heidegger was obsessed with what time does to our choices, not necessarily with clocks. And he makes time feel real because he ties time to responsibility. If you're finite, you can't keep living like you're not. So the first idea worth sharing is that time, I think, is more of a model. Time is a coordinate that we invented as humans to describe change and sequence or order. And we treat it like a substance, which is weird. We can save time or waste time, but it behaves more like a measuring stick. Different cultures also measure it differently. Calendars, hours, event time, clock time, which hints that it's more of a social technology. One way to think of it is that time is our best shared spreadsheet for reality.
All our lives, we're trying to save time. Every little thing you do, save time. Get to the red light, cut through the gas station. Go! You can save time. Can you save time? You can't save time. You try and kick the underwear up in the air, catch it. You know, you can't. It's not working. asking. You try your whole life to save up time, and at the end of your life, when you get to the end, there's no time saved up. You'll be pretty upset about it when you get to that moment. You gotta be, wait a minute, there's gotta be some extra time for me. I had a no-iron shirt, Velcro sneakers, clip-on tie. What about that?
And as I said, we don't have a time-sensing organ. We have sensors for light, pressure, sound, balance, temperature, but we have no dedicated time receptor in our bodies. What we call time perception is stitched together from our minds, from memory, attention, and bodily rhythms. And our brain estimates time using how much happened and how engaged I was. And our brain uses multiple different clocks, and they often disagree. And there's different rhythms like circadian rhythm, which is a daily rhythm every 24 hours. And there's ultradian rhythms, which are about 90-minute cycles, which also runs while you sleep. That's why you have sleep cycles. And it's also known as basic rest and activity cycles. It also runs your appetite. And there's other short interval timing, which is like on the order of seconds and minutes. And under stress, the clocks distort. Time slows down in danger, and time vanishes in flow. Sleep loss and anxiety blow up time perception altogether. And as I've talked about in previous videos, time speeds up with age because memory compression changes. When life is repetitive, the brain stores fewer novelty markers. So looking back, weeks feel like they've disappeared because the memory file is very thin. But for example, kids have constant novelty. They have dense memory and time feels longer. So if you want a practical tip, add novelty, learn new skills, and change the environment to experience time more fully.
Hello, Rob?
I've waited years.
How many years?
By now it must be.
It's 23 years, 4 months, 8 days.
And then when it comes to physics, time is weird even before consciousness enters the conversation. We know from relativity that time changes with speed and gravity. If you're going really fast, time slows down. If you are in a really strong gravitational field, time slows down. So now is not universal. Simultaneity depends on your frame of reference. So this alone breaks the common sense idea that time is one shared river that we're all floating down. So time isn't just experienced differently psychologically, it literally passes differently as well, according to physics.
This means time passes differently for different people, depending on how they move through space relative to each other. And this also means that what someone perceives as now is a certain cut along the block, a cut that will depend on how fast they're moving. So what you think is now is really only your now. There are many different nows in the universe, and all of them are equally real. This also means there's no universal past or future.
And then there's the directionality of time, or the arrow of time, and why time feels like it's going one way. Most fundamental physics equations don't care about past versus future. The one-way feeling comes from entropy, the fact that systems tend toward disorder. And mixing is very common, while unmixing is very rare. Memory also creates the arrow because we remember the past, not the future. So it just feels like we're going in one direction, constantly looking back at what we can remember. So in that sense, the arrow of time might be more of an arrow of information.
This is called the arrow of time. When a drop of food coloring is dropped into a glass of water, we instinctively know that the coloring will drift out from the drop, eventually filling the glass. Imagine watching the opposite happen. Here, we'd recognize time as unfolding backwards. We live in a universe where the food coloring spreads out in the water, not a universe where it collects together.
And then there's consciousness. Time could be a byproduct of attention and our memory. The present moment feels like a moving spotlight, but it might be the brain just updating a model. Some theories suggest that the brain integrates sensory info in short windows, like a now buffer. But things like meditation can change time experience because attention stops hopping around. So a good question would be, in this instance, if you had no memory, would time still exist? And then there's the topic of flow, a topic I'd love to do a video on in the near future. and this is when time dissolves. Flow reduces self-monitoring. You stop checking clocks and time can warp. So the paradox there is that high performance often comes when time awareness drops. And flow is a clue. Time isn't just external, it's tied to identity and narrative. So flow is just one way to break free from time. And then there's trauma and adrenaline, when time can slow down. In danger, the brain records more frames, also known as hyperencoding, so it feels slower. It's not that time changed, it's that memory density changed. This reinforces the fact that time is more of an information processing idea. Or in other words, time is partly the frame rate of your mind. And here's how I want to leave you with this episode, a simple map. On the left is objective time, time that exists outside of you. On the right is subjective time, time as your brain experiences it. Then on the bottom is time as a measurement tool, clocks, calendars, coordination. And then on the top is time as a meaning force, the thing that shapes your life, your urgency, your priorities. So the bottom left is clock time, useful, shared, practical. Bottom right is brain time, why a boring hour feels like forever and a great weekend disappears quickly. Top left is your physics time, relativity, time dilation, and the arrow of information. And then top right is existential spiritual time, like Heidegger's finitude and the Bhagavad Gita's idea of time as an unstoppable force. And so the punchline is this: all four are real in their own way. They all define time. But the mistake I think that we make as humans is that we tend to live only in the bottom left quadrant, treating time as a schedule. So the upgrade here is to use the clock, but remember the deeper question: what are you doing with the time that you've got? So what do we do with this? Time can be leverage and not necessarily an enemy or something to be scared of. If time's a model, then you can alter the experience by changing your inputs: novelty, attention, body rhythms, and your purpose. If time is finite, as according to Martin Heidegger and the Bhagavad Gita stories that I mentioned, meaning comes from commitment, not optimization. If time is malleable in a psychological sense, then protect your sleep, reduce stress, schedule deep work, and seek flow, which is rare for most of us. In closing, what would you do if you treated time like a teacher instead of a tyrant? That's all for this week. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep thinking and being, and do not go gentle into that good night.